speaker, Mr. Jorn Verbeeck, Head of Research and Innovation at Global Covenant of Mayors for Climate and Energy, the largest global alliance for city climate leadership, built upon the commitments of over 10,000 cities and local governments. Mr. Verbeeck, welcome. Please share with us what main challenges urban areas are facing now, both in terms of direct climate risks and in terms of resources for creating and implementing climate adaptation programs and risk mitigation strategies.
I think today important is that what has been stressed already a couple of times at this COP is that cities now really start to see the impact of climate change. I think compared to the last couple of years, cities are really the places where all the tangible outcome really becomes visible, where actors also start to raise their voice, to start questioning on what is actually happening, what is on the table. And I think their cities have really an important role to play as the innovation is really happening within cities, as all the partners meet in cities, but also to feel how can we scale up action. I think a lot of the solutions are already available, a lot of research and innovation will still be needed, but to better understand what can we scale up, what is the speed and the scale of action that will be needed to make sure that we reach net zero cities, but also the nationally determined contributions to arrive at the climate neutral horizon in time. And I think the role of cities there when it comes to finding on the missing links on whatever elements we need to do further research or action on, for example, on data, on finance, on partnerships, but also what is the governance model working together with public and private partners to really see how we can combine priorities, agendas, and to make sure that we talk the same language, that we look at the same outcome, but also have the same investment frameworks, time horizons, to really make sure that we get all on the same track, probably not providing a perfect answer, but that we at least start moving, as said, at the speed and scale that is needed. And therefore the global alliance of more than 11,000 cities is really helpful for also regions across the globe to learn from each other, to see what works in one region and can be transferred to another region, or to see whether it's an approach on finance, on data, on partnership, what is working, what can be adapted to really make sure that another region, where sometimes the impact is already more seen than in another region, how it can be adjusted and at that point also scaled up.
Thank you. I'm also wondering, are the challenges that most cities are facing now different from the ones we had to deal with 20 or 30 years ago?
I think so. I think 20 or 30 years ago it was still, well, let's go back to the 70s even, when the Club of Rome report was launched on limits to growth. I mean, the talk about systemic changes and the fact that at some point there will be a threshold was already there. But I think at that point it was still talks, it was the beginning of science, gathering more data. I think where we are now, as I said in the previous question, is that we start to see the effects on cities and on regions when it comes to climate hazards, when it comes to drought, when it comes to flooding. So it really becomes tangible. And I think people also start to realize that if we talk about 2050, that's in another 30 years. It's really this generation of young people, which we also see at this conference, that will see the effects of climate change. And I think therefore in cities, it's really the open forum to see what are we going to do, not only what the plans and commitments are, but what is also action on the ground. How can we go to large-scale demonstrators, whether they're from the public or the private sector, or joint initiatives. So I think that the biggest change has been on, it's really happening now, and we said it for a long time, but the fact also that we know we couldn't change it or come up with a perfect answer in the last decades, so we need to start moving, but really start think on, do we do enough with what we know, and keep learning as we go. It's not just about 5-year commitments. It's also about reflexive monitoring to see what do we try, does it work, what else is needed, what are barriers, what are enablers, and to take it from there. But to start, as said, with an imperfect solution to really keep moving.
Thank you. Can you highlight the best tools and practices to support local responses to climate change? And how do we support research projects and data collection programs that help better understand what different cities and regions need to boost urban resilience?
I think there's a number of aspects. First one is on data. So from the Global Covenant of Mayors point of view, we have invested a lot in data gathering, sometimes seeing which local data is available, but also which national or international data can be downscaled, just to make sure that we have the right framework, that there's a plan, that we know what priorities are, where to invest, which actions, initiatives to take. But also on finance, how to unlock finance available? What are projects that can be supported? How can we have them talk the same language? How can we bring together all those different partners that have the means, but also have the solutions and the capacity to put them on the ground? So these are elements that are really important. And the last one, apart from data and finance, is the whole idea of research, innovation and partnerships. Research and innovation on seeing what are gaps where we don't have the science yet, where we need both top-down and bottom-up action, but also what is then the way that we bring together partners that have a number of the solutions, that have done a number of experiments to see how we can adapt them to the regional disparities to make sure that we go towards implementation, that we go beyond commitments and really start implementing with all the partners, roles, responsibilities, funding and data involved. And what I said a couple of times also there, it's about detecting the gaps, see where we can help cities, find a standard solution where possible, as it will be more efficient, freeing up time for implementation. But if there's still a gap, to also point towards the gap and see what can be done to start filling it.
You're joining us from the COP26 summit, the United Nations Climate Change Conference that aims at bringing parties together to accelerate action towards the goals of the Paris Agreement and the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. How do we involve other stakeholders, in particular businesses and citizens, in developing climate resilience plans? What possible conflicts of interest can arise and how can we prevent them?
It's a really good question. I think important there, it's to really see what's their narrative, what's their agenda. It's not just coming from COP and saying like, this is the talk we've been negotiating or discussing. It's also to understand in terms of business, what is the changing market? What is the business model? What is the investment time and framework behind, to also address them in their language. Same for bottom-up stakeholders, to also see how do they connect to the story? How can they really add, what's their responsibility, what's their role? How can we connect to them? And I think the open talk, and I think one lesson for me to take from COP is to have that long open dialogue, to keep continuing the dialogue, to see that we involve them, ask about, is it clear on what we need to do? What's in it for us, what's in it for you, that we're clear about the joint agenda and that we can take action together. Integrated action oriented towards a systemic level, that it's not just about climate, but also about the other societal challenges that we face, whether it's on the migration, whether it's on sustainable housing, whether it's on the new finance markets, that we bring all these challenges together and see what is a co-benefit to what is integrated or what is intricately linked, that we know if you pull on one string, what else will be moving, and then to make sure that we come up with an answer that can address hopefully all these different transitions, to also ensure that we can deliver a just transition so that we leave no one behind.
Mr. Verbeeck, thank you for these fascinating insights.